The inheritance nobody wanted. Rain fell in slow, relentless sheets as mourners drifted away from the cemetery, leaving Clara standing alone beside the freshly covered grave. She had barely known her great-uncle Arthur, yet somehow his passing weighed heavier than the conversations they had never shared. Inside the old lawyer's office, polished oak walls echoed with uneasy silence, while relatives exchanged polite smiles that barely concealed eager anticipation. Everyone expected fortunes to change hands today. Arthur had owned valuable land, antique collections, and investments worth millions. Whispered guesses floated through the room before the attorney unfolded the final pages of the will. Jewelry went to one cousin, vacation properties to another. Rare paintings disappeared into someone else's future. Every announcement drew satisfied nods until only Clara remained. The attorney adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. To my great-niece, Clara Bennett, I leave my faithful companion, Max. A confused silence settled before awkward laughter spread across the room. Someone muttered that Arthur had finally lost his senses. Another relative joked that feeding an old German shepherd would cost more than anything he was worth. Clara forced a faint smile, embarrassed by the pitying looks surrounding her. Only one person reacted differently. Her cousin Richard released a slow breath, almost impossible to notice, but unmistakably relieved. The attorney handed Clara a worn leather leash. Outside, Max waited patiently beside the entrance, his gray muzzle revealing his age while intelligent amber eyes studied everyone passing by. Clara knelt and softly called his name. Max approached without hesitation, pressing his head gently against her hand as though recognizing someone he had been waiting for. When Richard tugged the leash, Max refused to move. Another relative tried. The dog stood perfectly still. Only when Clara stepped forward did Max rise calmly and walk beside her, never looking back. Behind them, Richard watched in sudden silence, his fading smile replaced by something far more dangerous than disappointment: fear. Strange behavior begins. Clara expected the first night to be quiet, but Max refused to settle. He wandered through her small house with deliberate patience, sniffing every doorway before stopping beside an old wooden cabinet. He scratched 3 times, then looked directly at her. Assuming he wanted attention, Clara opened the cabinet, but nothing inside interested him. Instead, he whined softly until she closed it again. That night he barely slept. Every hour she heard his paws crossing the hallway before returning to the front door. Just before sunset the next evening, Max stood waiting beside the entrance, ears raised, tail perfectly still. The moment 6 o'clock arrived, he began pulling insistently against the leash. Curious, Clara followed him outside, but after reaching the sidewalk he stopped and stared toward the distant hills before reluctantly turning back. The exact routine repeated itself the following evening, and again the day after. Whenever the television replayed news coverage about Arthur's estate, Max listened silently. Yet the instant Richard's name was mentioned, a low growl rumbled deep inside his chest. His fur bristled while his eyes fixed on the screen until the report ended. Clara tried convincing herself that grief explained everything. Dogs mourned differently, she reminded herself. Still, every strange habit seemed purposeful rather than random. One rainy afternoon she found him nosing beneath Arthur's old travel bag. Inside were ordinary clothes and faded maps, but Max ignored them, pawing repeatedly at a locked drawer beneath the desk instead. No matter how gently she called him away, he returned to that exact spot, scratching with quiet determination. By the end of the week, coincidence no longer seemed believable. Each action connected with another, forming an invisible trail only Max appeared able to understand. Clara couldn't explain why, but a growing feeling settled deep inside her heart. The old dog wasn't lost. He was trying to lead her somewhere. The first hidden clue. Clara couldn't ignore the feeling any longer. On the 4th evening, Max repeated his familiar ritual, waiting beside the door until the clock struck 6. This time she clipped on his leash without hesitation. Instead of stopping at the sidewalk, Max pulled steadily toward Arthur's abandoned workshop at the edge of the old property. The weathered building smelled of cedar, machine oil, and forgotten years. Dust floated through narrow beams of evening light slipping between cracked boards. Max moved confidently across the room before stopping beside an ancient workbench. He pawed once, then twice, then stared directly at the floor. Kneeling, Clara noticed one plank sitting slightly higher than the others. She wedged a screwdriver beneath the edge and gently lifted it. Hidden underneath lay a small metal box wrapped in oilcloth. Her pulse quickened as she opened it. Inside rested a faded photograph showing Arthur standing beside a younger man whose face had been carefully marked with black ink. Beneath the picture lay several folded handwritten pages filled with dates, initials, and cryptic observations that made little immediate sense. At the bottom rested an old-fashioned brass key attached to a leather tag bearing only the number 17. None of these items had been listed in the estate inventory. Arthur had hidden them deliberately, expecting someone to find them eventually. But why Clara and why now? Before she could read another line, tires crunched across gravel outside. Car door slammed. Max's ears shot upright, and a warning growl echoed through the workshop. Heart racing, Clara stuffed the photograph, notes, and key into her jacket pocket before replacing the box beneath the floorboard. Heavy footsteps approached the entrance. A shadow stretched beneath the door, paused, then reached for the handle. Clara held her breath, silently praying whoever stood outside hadn't seen the light inside. Max positioned himself between her and the doorway, muscles tense despite his age, never barking, only watching with unwavering focus as the doorknob slowly began turning. Everyone wants the dog back. The workshop door swung open, revealing not a stranger but Richard. His polished shoes crunched across the dusty floor as his eyes swept the room before settling on Clara and Max. A practiced smile crossed his face, though it never reached his eyes. "I figured I'd find you here," he said casually. "Just checking the property before it's sold." Clara forced herself to remain calm, slipping one hand into her jacket pocket where the photograph and brass key rested safely out of sight. Max stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Richard and Clara. A deep, threatening growl rolled through the quiet workshop. Richard stopped instantly. "I've never seen him act like that," he muttered, taking an uneasy step backward. The next morning, Clara received an unexpected phone call from the attorney's office. Another family lawyer claimed there had been confusion surrounding Arthur's will. They politely suggested returning Max until the paperwork could be reviewed. Something about the request felt rehearsed. By afternoon, Richard appeared at her doorstep carrying an envelope. "I know the dog isn't exactly convenient," he said with a sympathetic smile. "I'll give you $20,000 for him. No questions asked." Clara stared at him in disbelief. Days earlier, the same relatives had laughed at the idea of inheriting an old German shepherd. Now they were competing to take him away. Before she could answer, Richard crouched and reached toward Max. The dog's reaction was immediate. His ears flattened. His lips curled back, exposing worn but formidable teeth. A fierce bark shattered the silence, followed by another deep growl unlike anything Clara had heard before. Max refused to let Richard come within several feet. Richard slowly stood, forcing an awkward laugh. "Guess he still doesn't like me." "No," Clara replied quietly, watching Max without taking her eyes off Richard. "I don't think that's it." As Richard drove away, Clara realized everyone suddenly wanted the one inheritance they had once mocked. And if Max feared Richard that deeply, perhaps the old dog remembered something no one else wanted revealed. Following Max's trail, Clara stopped questioning Max's instincts. Every evening, almost precisely at sunset, he insisted on leaving the house, following routes that seemed random until they began forming a story only Arthur could have written. She no longer held the leash to guide him. Instead, she simply followed. Their first destination was a secluded lake hidden behind dense pines. The water reflected the fading sky like polished glass, undisturbed except for the gentle ripple of ducks crossing the surface. Max walked directly to an old wooden bench overlooking the shore and scratched beneath it. Taped underneath was a weathered envelope sealed inside a waterproof pouch. Inside, Arthur had written only one sentence. "If you're reading this, Max chose correctly. Trust him before you trust anyone else." The words sent a chill through Clara. The following evening, Max led her to an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the woods. Time had claimed most of the structure, yet one bookshelf remained standing. Behind a loose board she discovered several journal pages filled with symbols, initials, and dates arranged in a coded pattern. Though impossible to understand immediately, every page ended with the same phrase: "The truth survives if the path remains complete." Before leaving, an elderly groundskeeper approached quietly. He recognized Max instantly. "Arthur brought him here every month," the old man recalled. "He always said the dog remembered better than people did." Those words lingered as Max continued leading her onward. Days later, they reached an aging railway bridge overlooking a narrow river. There, an old retired conductor remembered Arthur visiting shortly before his death. "He looked frightened," the man admitted. "Kept saying some people smile while burying the truth." He handed Clara a rusted tin box Arthur had asked him to protect until someone arrived with an old German shepherd. Inside rested another coded letter and a faded map marked with unfamiliar symbols. Standing beneath the bridge, Clara finally understood the impossible. Arthur hadn't hidden random keepsakes. Years before his death, he had designed an elaborate trail of evidence, trusting only one companion to preserve it. And Max was faithfully following every step exactly as he had been trained, leading Clara ever closer to a truth someone had desperately tried to erase forever. The truth about the death. By now, Clara no longer believed she was following the memories of a grieving dog. She was following a carefully constructed investigation. Every clue Arthur had hidden seemed connected to one unsettling question that refused to leave her mind. Did he really die of natural causes? She requested copies of Arthur's medical records, expecting nothing unusual. Instead, she found conflicting dates, missing physician signatures, and a final examination recorded nearly 12 hours after neighbors claimed an ambulance had already taken him away. The timeline simply didn't fit. Hoping someone else might notice what she was seeing, Clara visited the small county archives. Newspaper articles described Arthur's death as peaceful, but interviews with neighbors painted a different picture. One insisted hearing shouting the night before he died. Another claimed unfamiliar vehicles had been parked outside his property after midnight. A third swore the house lights stayed on until dawn. None of those statements had appeared in the official report. The deeper Clara searched, the stranger everything became. Security footage from a nearby gas station should have captured every vehicle entering Arthur's road that evening. Instead, nearly 45 minutes of recordings were missing without explanation. Someone hadn't simply overlooked evidence. Someone had removed it. Following another name from Arthur's coded journal, Clara arranged to meet retired Sheriff Walter Hayes. Age had slowed him, but not his memory. After listening quietly, he leaned back with a heavy sigh. "I signed the paperwork," he admitted, "but I never slept well afterward." He explained how several details had troubled him from the beginning. Witnesses changed their stories. Evidence arrived incomplete. Requests for additional investigation were quietly denied before they reached the state office. "I suspected something wasn't right," Walter said softly. "But suspicion isn't enough to accuse powerful people." As Clara left, Walter stopped her at the door. "If you're asking these questions now," he warned, "someone already knows." Outside, Max stood perfectly still, staring toward a black SUV parked across the street. The engine started the moment Clara appeared. It pulled away slowly, disappearing around the corner before she could read the license plate. The mystery had crossed an invisible line. It was no longer about discovering the truth. It was about surviving long enough to reveal it. "Someone is watching," Clara barely slept that night. Every creak of the old house sounded different now, as if the walls themselves were warning her to stay alert. Max refused to leave the front window, watching the darkness with unwavering focus. His ears twitched at every passing car, every distant footstep, every whisper carried by the wind. 3 mornings later, she returned from the grocery store to find her front door slightly open. Nothing expensive had been taken. Her television, laptop, and jewelry remained untouched. Instead, Arthur's journals were gone. The locked drawer Max had scratched at stood wide open, its contents scattered across the floor. Whoever entered hadn't come looking for valuables. They had searched for evidence. Panicked, Clara reached into the lining of her jacket where she'd secretly sewn a small pocket. The photograph, brass key, and coded map were still there. Someone had missed the most important clues. The following afternoon, an unmarked envelope appeared in her mailbox without a stamp or return address. Inside was a single type sentence. Some secrets should stay buried. No signature. No fingerprints. Nothing else. Fear settled over her like a heavy fog, but it only strengthened her resolve. Then came the attack that frightened her most. While walking through the backyard, Max suddenly stopped before eating a piece of meat lying near the fence. Instead of swallowing it, he sniffed once and backed away, growling low. Clara immediately called a veterinarian, who confirmed her worst suspicion. The meat contained enough poison to kill a large dog. Someone hadn't been trying to scare her. Someone had been trying to eliminate the only witness who couldn't speak. That evening, retired Sheriff Hayes arrived unexpectedly after hearing about the break-in. "You've got to assume every move is being watched," he said gravely. "Whoever's behind this isn't guessing anymore. They know exactly how close you're getting." As if proving his words, Clara noticed a faint red light blinking from a parked vehicle across the road. Camera. Someone wasn't merely following her. They were waiting for her to uncover the final secret so they could stop her before the truth ever reached daylight. The secret hidden for years. The poisoning convinced Clara there was no time left to hesitate. Arthur's trail had always pointed forward, never backward, and Max seemed to sense they were approaching its end. Before sunrise, the old German shepherd stood waiting by the door, unusually restless. Without a command, he set off toward the far edge of Arthur's neglected farmland. After nearly an hour, they reached an abandoned barn swallowed by weeds and creeping vines. The weathered structure looked ready to collapse, yet Max walked inside with unwavering confidence. He ignored broken tools and rotting hay, stopping instead beside an enormous rusted grain bin. He barked once, then began scratching furiously at the wooden floor beneath it. Together, Clara pushed the heavy bin aside. Hidden underneath was a rusted iron hatch. With trembling hands, she unlocked it using the brass key marked 17. The door groaned open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Dust filled the stale air as Clara switched on her flashlight. Below lay a carefully preserved underground room, untouched for years. Shelves lined every wall. Stacked neatly across them were Arthur's journals, folders of financial statements, property deeds, audio recordings, family photographs, and sealed legal files. Every document had been dated, organized, and cross-referenced with astonishing precision. Hours passed as Clara uncovered the truth piece by piece. Millions of dollars worth of land had been transferred through forged signatures. Legitimate heirs had quietly lost their inheritances. Shell companies purchased family property before secretly selling it for enormous profits. Bank records revealed years of fraud hidden beneath layers of false transactions. Then Clara found Arthur's final journal. Its last pages described his discovery of the entire scheme and named the people responsible. He wrote that he feared they would silence him before he could expose everything publicly. If that happened, Max had already been trained to guide the only person Arthur believed would never sell the truth. Tears blurred Clara's vision as every clue suddenly aligned. The photograph, the coded letters, the hidden map. The suspicious death. None of it had been random. Arthur hadn't merely left behind evidence. He had built a carefully engineered path to justice, trusting one loyal dog to protect the truth until the right person finally found it. The ultimate reveal. Clara sat in the hidden room for hours, carefully arranging Arthur's journals beside the financial records, photographs, and recordings. Every page answered one question while raising another until only a single sealed envelope remained unopened. Across the front, Arthur had written in careful handwriting, "Open only after you have found everything else." Her hands trembled as she broke the faded wax seal. Inside was a handwritten letter addressed directly to her. "If you're reading this, then Max has done exactly what I prayed he would do. The people responsible will expect you to blame Richard first. That is precisely what they want. Richard is greedy, impatient, and easily manipulated, but he is not the architect." Clara's heartbeat quickened. Arthur continued. "The true mastermind is someone no one will ever suspect because they have spent decades earning everyone's trust." She turned the page. The next name nearly stole the air from her lungs. Margaret Whitmore, Arthur's older sister. The respected family matriarch. The woman who had comforted everyone at the funeral. The woman known throughout the community for her generosity, charitable work, and unwavering kindness. It was impossible. Yet every document confirmed the same horrifying truth. Margaret had quietly controlled the shell companies, directed fraudulent land transfers, bribed officials, and manipulated relatives into signing papers they never understood. Richard had served only as her ambitious messenger, believing he would eventually inherit everything himself. Instead, he had been another pawn. Arthur's audio recordings removed every remaining doubt. One recording captured Margaret threatening him after he refused to sign over another parcel of land. Another documented Arthur explaining that if anything happened to him, his death should never be accepted as natural. Then came the final recording. Arthur spoke softly while Max could be heard breathing beside him. "Good boy," Arthur whispered. "If I don't come home one day, you'll find Clara. She still believes people deserve the truth. She won't stop because money doesn't control her." Clara wiped away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Everything suddenly made perfect sense. Arthur hadn't left her money because wealth could be stolen. He hadn't left her property because documents could disappear. He had left her Max because loyalty couldn't be forged, bribed, intimidated, or bought. Only the old German shepherd could remember every hidden location, every carefully planned step, and every secret Arthur had entrusted to him years before. The inheritance everyone had mocked was never a consolation prize. It had always been the master key to exposing a conspiracy hidden in plain sight. Justice fights back. Clara knew the evidence was too important to keep hidden another day. With Sheriff Walter Hayes at her side, she delivered Arthur's journals, recordings, financial records, and legal files directly to state investigators. Every document was copied, catalogued, and secured before anyone outside the investigation learned they existed. But the news traveled faster than expected. Within hours, Margaret's attorneys filed emergency motions claiming the evidence had been fabricated. Family members who had ignored Clara for weeks suddenly flooded her phone with desperate messages, insisting there had been a misunderstanding. Richard even appeared at her door one last time, offering apologies mixed with thinly disguised threats if she refused to remain silent. She simply closed the door. Days later, investigators executed search warrants across multiple properties connected to Margaret's businesses. Hidden accounts were uncovered. Forged contracts matched Arthur's journals perfectly. Digital records recovered from company servers confirmed decades of carefully orchestrated fraud. The missing security footage was located on a forgotten backup drive, showing vehicles arriving at Arthur's home during the hours officials claimed no visitors had been there. The truth could no longer be buried. Television stations interrupted regular programming as federal agents escorted Margaret from her estate in handcuffs. Richard was arrested before sunset. Bank accounts worth millions were frozen. Fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and homicide-related charges followed one after another as prosecutors revealed the enormous scale of the scheme. For families who had quietly lost homes, land, and inheritances over the years, the announcements brought something many had abandoned long ago: validation. They had never imagined someone would finally believe them. Yet justice carried its own unbearable weight. Standing outside the courthouse, Clara watched reporters surround the people she had once called family. Every headline exposed another betrayal. Every interview reopened wounds Arthur had carried alone until his final days. Max leaned gently against her leg, his aging eyes fixed on the courthouse doors. "He should have been here to see this," she whispered. Walter nodded solemnly. "No," he replied. He knew he wouldn't be. Clara looked down at Max, finally understanding the sacrifice Arthur had accepted years before. Justice had prevailed. But the price had been measured not only in stolen fortunes, but in broken trust, shattered family bonds, and one courageous man's life. Promise finally kept. Months passed, and for the first time in years, peace slowly returned to the old family property. Court rulings restored stolen land to its rightful owners, while Arthur's estate was finally settled according to his true wishes. Clara declined the luxury of moving away. Instead, she chose to remain where everything had begun, believing some places deserved healing more than abandonment. The neglected farmhouse gradually came back to life. Fresh paint replaced weathered walls, gardens bloomed where weeds once grew, and children's laughter occasionally echoed across fields that had witnessed decades of deception. Every improvement felt like a quiet promise fulfilled rather than a celebration. Using part of the recovered inheritance, Clara established the Arthur Bennett Rescue Foundation, dedicated to caring for abandoned and elderly animals that others had overlooked. She wanted every frightened dog crossing its gates to receive the same chance Max had given her. People from neighboring towns volunteered without hesitation. Families adopted animals once considered unwanted, and Arthur's story quietly inspired countless acts of kindness. Through it all, Max finally changed. The constant vigilance faded from his eyes. He no longer paced through restless nights or stood guard at every window. Instead, he spent warm afternoons sleeping beneath the large oak tree Arthur had planted decades earlier, waking only when Clara called his name. Sometimes she sat beside him with a cup of coffee, watching the sunset paint the fields in shades of gold. Neither needed words anymore. Their shared silence carried every memory, every hardship, and every victory. Visitors often praised Clara for exposing the truth, but she always smiled and shook her head. "I only followed," she would say. Then she would gently scratch behind Max's ears. He was the one who never gave up. For the first time since Arthur's death, the old German shepherd looked completely at peace. His mission had ended. What remained was something far greater than justice. It was healing, built upon loyalty, love, and a promise that had finally been kept. The final goodbye. Winter arrived quietly, covering the fields with silver frost and gentle morning mist. Max had grown slower with each passing season, his once powerful stride replaced by careful, measured steps. Yet every sunrise, he still insisted on walking beside Clara to the old oak tree where Arthur had once sat with him for countless evenings. One peaceful morning, Max rested his head in Clara's lap as golden sunlight filtered through the branches above them. His breathing became softer, his tired eyes never leaving hers. She stroked his graying fur and whispered words of gratitude through silent tears. With one final contented sigh, Max slipped away, leaving the world exactly as he had entered it, with quiet dignity and unwavering loyalty. Days later, while carefully packing away his collar, favorite blanket, and worn leash, Clara noticed a small stitched pocket hidden inside the old leather collar. Her hands trembled as she unfolded a yellowed letter protected within. Arthur's familiar handwriting filled the page. "If this letter reaches you, then Max has finished the greatest task I could ever ask of him. I never doubted he would find the right person. Dogs never judge wealth, status, or appearances. They choose character. I trusted Max because he always saw the truth beneath the surface. And I trusted you because I believed you would do the same. Tears blurred every word. That evening, Clara returned to the cemetery where everything had begun. Standing before Arthur's headstone with Max's collar gently resting in her hands, she looked across the peaceful countryside now free from lies and fear. Everyone had laughed when she inherited an old dog. They believed she had received the smallest share. Instead, she had inherited courage when she needed strength, loyalty when everyone else betrayed her, and a faithful companion who carried justice safely through years of silence. The greatest inheritance had never been measured in money or land. It had been truth. It had been redemption. And it had been the unbreakable bond between one remarkable man, one extraordinary dog, and the woman who finally completed the journey they had begun together.